Marshall Bravestarr was a very surprising breath of fresh air.
I think it was a show that really had a lot of positive messages.
Filmation puts sci-fi with cowboys together.
That 30 minutes that show was on, you're learning a lesson.
30-30, by far my favorite character.
Doing the right thing, good representation.
The 86 toy line is something really special.
Everyone was just effortlessly cool.
And I think that's its lasting legacy. The 80s was a bonanza of toy opportunities. That is probably the best way to put it. If you could think up an idea, chances were it was going to go into production.
Toy companies were coming off of the success of the big three, like He-Man, Transformers, G.I. Joe, and it was just before Ninja Turtles took off. So everyone was just throwing any idea at the wall, any toy line, any cartoon. Everyone was trying to get literally anything to make a buck, and if it didn't succeed, they pulled the plug really quickly.
And in regards to Mattel, they were always looking for, well, what's the next big thing after Masters of the Universe?
It was a wonderful machine that Hasbro and Mattel had us going through. You know, you had the toy line and the cartoon or the comic book, sometimes the video game. One fueled the other, and as we're going to see with Bravestarr and why it didn't do so great, it's because one of those key elements was missing, which was the cartoon came way too late.
So Filmation was, legendary for many reasons. They sort of probably got a real boost in the 70s with Star Trek.
My experience with Filmation would have started with Bravestarr.
One of the first real big 80s properties that they did was Bravestarr. Lou Scheimer wanted to take a lot of chances on that show, but there's definitely some aspects of it that influenced how Bravestarr was done. I know initially Bravestarr was supposed to be a black man named John Bravestarr. Studio execs didn't think Middle America was ready for that for some reason, so they left his race ambiguous. It's been theorized that John Bravestarr was supposed to be Native American, but we did end up getting a Native American space lawman about 6 years later in the form of Marshall Bravestarr.
But of course, He-Man was the real breakout for them. There were some plans considered to tie Bravestarr to Masters of the Universe, considering the latter's success, but I'm not sure how far that went into development.
I didn't hear that actually till a few years ago. Very interesting, and I could see how that would have worked, but I gotta say, I'm glad that it didn't. I like it the way it is.
And it's interesting the things that influenced how Bravestarr came to be. Like, He-Man had the Sorceress, that was the keeper of the secrets of Grayskull. Well, Marshall Bravestarr had Shaman, who helped him tap into fabulous secret powers, as it were.
Fabulous secret powers were revealed to me the day I held aloft my magic sword.
So there are many, many iconic villains throughout the 80s, both in cartoons, movies, and toy lines. We always hear about Skeletor, we always hear about Megatron and Darth Vader. No one really talks a lot about Tex Hex. He's really great. He's a scoundrel. He's kind of like this dirty, slimy criminal.
So Tex Hex was initially designed for Filmation's Ghostbusters, not the real Ghostbusters. But they fell in love with the design so much so that they decided to hold him back. They said, we're going to keep this for something special. And Tex Hex very much was just that villain, that secret sauce that made it better. For every good hero, there's a good villain. So He-Man had Skeletor, Bravestarr had Tex Hex. Tex Hex was a bit of an amalgam of, say, Skeletor and Hordak, whereas, he had the sort of magic powers, the charm, the drama of Skeletor, but there was a greater evil. So whereas Hordak had Horde Prime, Tex Hex had Stampede.
So there was a lot of parallels that I think Lou Scheimer and Filmation drew from. It is interesting, the through line. of Filmation, from Bravestarr in 81 to Motu to Filmation's Ghostbusters all the way to Bravestarr. It's very interesting, that little game of hopscotch, how we arrived there.
And 3030, by far my favorite character in this show.
If you go back to the movie of how Bravestarr meets 3030, 3030 is scary when you first meet him. He's angry, and Bravestarr is this intruder, and he is ready to throw down with him. And just the fact that they end up becoming best friends.
One of the greatest origin stories of how a partnership came together, how they were adversaries at first, and then through combat, he earned the respect of 3030. It's just an incredible character.
3030 was such a great character. He's what Battle Cat should have been, where he was just super duper cool. He could, fight beside you, but then transform into a horse and problematically let Bravestarr ride him. I found that odd now. I did then.
I don't understand why 3030 and Bravestarr couldn't both have like a hover cycle of some sort, but at the same time, you want to go for toyetics, you want to go for visuals. In fact, one of my very favorite things about that show is the opening, and of course they're getting ready to fight back to back and they just wink at each other. I don't know why I love that. I love it to this day.
The Prairie People were, not my favorite aspect of Bravestarr, let's say, but they were an important part of a Western style show, whereas they were the indigenous people, the ones who lived on the planet originally. Fuzz and Scuzz, I know you would probably like Fuzz more because he was sort of the cutesy sidekick character. I, of course, could not stand that little guy.
So, of course, He-Man had Orko, his little imp kind of character. Bravestarr had his imp character in the form of Deputy Fuzz.
What you do here? Not your business! Goodbye!
And I know Scuzz was meant to be the chain-smoking, annoying character. I mean, even other villains were disgusted by his smoking, but maybe I was like, he's kind of a cool guy, it's fine.
You had a really good cast. Shaman was this very mysterious character anytime he showed up in an episode. Handlebar, the Cantina Keep.
Judge McBride, just a wonderful character, and really kind of bummed me out because there was no female toys. Always made me wonder why they didn't make her, considering she was, I guess you could say, a love interest for Bravestarr. They went back and forth with that whole thing, but it's really bummed out they never made her as a figure.
The bad guys were cool looking. Stampede was pretty frightening. So you really had a great cast of characters.
So Bravestarr was almost like the Firefly before Firefly, where you had this sort of futuristic cyberpunk western.
Bravestarr, the setting was always really interesting to me. New Texas is an interesting name for the planet. There's a lot of great ideas that they explored there.
If I can give a critique, the only thing that seemed a little off, it's called New Texas. I kind of would have liked it if they stuck with the original name, New Cheyenne. I think that could have been a little cooler, but this whole idea of a boom town in space and outlaws in space, and it's very much the Wild West, but it's with like hover cycles and ray guns.
I like the idea of a mineral being at the source of everything. Everyone's trying to get carium. It was very precious. So every single episode, you knew what the main focus was. It was to get more of this.
A magical mineral, like a pound or a piece the size of your fist, powering a spaceship for, what was it, about a year? That's a dream. So curium was sort of the MacGuffin of the show. That was the driving force behind it. That's why everybody's on New Texas. That's why the Prairie People are working. And that's why we need Marshal Bravestarr. You have a mining town. You have a new enterprise set up. You're going to have a criminal element trying to take advantage of it. In addition to that, that's how Tex Hex winds up with his kind of ghastly powers. He's a miner, and he ends up encountering Stampede, an ancient evil that imbues him with power.
So Marshal Bravestarr was a very surprising breath of fresh air, especially in the 80s, and frankly even now.
Well, Marshal Bravestarr being Native American was very important.
I think it's incredible that in 1987 you had a Native American lead
diversity was in all of these lines that we collected. It was certainly in Bravestarr, G.I. Joe.
G.I. Joe did quite a great service in the regards where they had Spirit was a real fan favorite. So to see not only a character who wasn't, Native American, who was the lead of a show, but also that was kind of baked into his characters. It wasn't shied upon. It was very much, proudly a part of him.
I thought he was the coolest. My only beef was that the toy itself did not have the ponytail.
It's just a little strange that that little detail, they took that away. I don't understand it.
As you can see, I like long hair, so I was kind of bummed when I got the toy and he didn't have the ponytail.
The coolest part about Bravestarr is this ability to just call on these powers.
So Bravestarr had 4 main abilities.
Eyes of the Hawk!
The most sort of pragmatic of the powers would be Eyes of the Hawk.
Eyes of the Hawk, so he could scout ahead.
Ears of the Wolf!
Ears of the Wolf, I guess, so he can hear Tex Hex coming around the corner, I guess.
Strength of the Bear!
Well, I'm sorry, joke's on you. Strength of the Bear, now I'm gonna win.
Speed of the Puma!
Speed of the Puma, of course, he's got to be able to run faster than the bad guys.
That was cool. You're playing on the playground with your buddies. Of course you're reenacting this.
We can hear our kids' selves screaming this stuff out.
I have very distinct memories. 5 years old, 1987, reenacting that, not far from where I live now.
One thing that all these cartoons in the 80s had in common was the lessons, or it seemed like they all had a lesson to be learned. G.I. Joe with the PSAs, Bravestarr, He-Man. I mean, I didn't know what drugs were, or what the point of taking them or anything, but we certainly knew that they were bad and that you didn't want to be involved with them. So I think the lessons were very important.
And to supplement the ongoing awareness of drug use, Filmation aired a very memorable yet controversial episode of Bravestarr, and unfortunately, it wasn't one of those episodes where the hero was able to save the day.
The episode The Price was really shocking, then as now, because it was, another one of those don't do drugs episodes that were, really kind of cropping up at that time. However, there were actual dire consequences.
It is dark. It involves a drug called spin, and it is, throughout the episode, it is driving town folks crazy. They're having to be locked up to kind of get over the hump of withdrawals and not having it. A kid starts taking it.
They actually pulled the trigger, literally and figuratively, in the Price episode.
And I'm just going to spoil it for you. The kid dies.
A drug user dies, and it really, cements home the dangers of it, but also was quite surprising to see on Saturday morning.
His little buddy tries to get Bravestarr to get to the kid and stop him. The mom starts freaking out. Very heavy for an 80s cartoon. Of all the ones I ever watched, that one will always stand out.
So the 88 movie was great.
I love the movie.
I still want to track down a Bravestarr poster for that movie.
You can tell they really poured in money. They really poured in time. They really tried to, give us something a little more special, because there was a lot of brand new animation, a lot of really gorgeous vista.
And it just fleshes out the origin more for how he got his powers, how he came to New Texas, his relationship with Shaman, discovering his destiny, meeting 3030.
And because it actually dealt with the origin of Bravestarr, finally, we never actually got that originally, but it really did fill in the blanks of questions we had from episode 1, and so it really, was a full circle kind of moment to watch that.
The unfortunate side of it is it wasn't released until 88. By that point in time, the series was winding down. There was not going to be a season 2. I'm glad we even got it. The storytelling's great. It's incredibly well done from front to back. If you've never seen it, or you haven't seen it in a while, check it out. It does hold up very well.
I mean, the voice cast is the who's who of Filmation, but also other 80s cartoons.
Alan Oppenheimer is a complete legend, so to see him return in the villain role as Stampede amongst other characters, does it get any better than that guy? He's a legend.
You, of course, have Pat Fraley, who he's been in everything. Pat Fraley probably has about like 200-300 credits to his name.
The women were played by Sue Blu, who was legendary mostly for playing RC, but was also Stormer on Gem.
Charlie Adler, Susan Blu, Alan Oppenheimer, just these mainstays of 80s properties, and even into the 90s too. They are the voices of our collective childhood experience. You really had this great cast breathing life into these characters, giving them a voice. I do find it interesting that there were plans for a spin-off that focused on the Prairie People.
Filmation and Mattel felt they had reason to be confident in Bravestarr during its development, such that they were convinced a spin-off series would be a good idea. The series, to be called Bravo, was a bit less serious and did have a single episode filmed, but ultimately was not picked up for a full run.
I do wonder if Bravo was going to be much more akin to what, say, Ghostbusters was doing at the time, where it suddenly kind of veered off into more toddler territory, where they're going for a much younger audience.
And they were so sure of it, it's like, you know what, we're going to start planning a spin-off of it. We're going to focus on the Prairie People.
The 86 toy line is something really special. First off, I love the plastics that Mattel use. It feels sturdy. They feel like you can throw them around and they're not going to break. But you had really cool things like the whip from Deputy Fuzz, which is one of the hardest accessories to get in toy history. That thing, it's just like one of those little silly sticky arms. Right down to Bravestarr, who has a removable hat. So you had so many great accessories for each figure. Borobot, the only figure I don't have. Damn Borobot. Thunderstick was interesting, and I brought mine up from the toy room because I think he's one of the most beautiful toys from the 80s. That being said, he looks completely different in the cartoon than he does in the toy line. The toy line, I think he looks much better, but just a great, solid thug sidekick character for Tex Hex. Fort Carrion was wonderful because it was sold as two different pieces, the bank and the jail, and then the command center, or you could get a deluxe set with all three. But once you had all three together, they all formed a street. So it was just like a big chunk of the world, really great for world building. I still have one sealed. Luckily, I have the middle column, the command center. 3030 was great. You know, much like Battle Cat, it was just a little bit more kick. You know, he could transform into an actual character, and he could be Bravestarr's mount. So much imagination with this line, and I gotta say, the one thing I loved is that all of them came with a piece of Carrion. So a few characters I wish they made, they never did. It was really perplexing to me as a kid, were Stampede and Shaman, Obi-Wan and the Emperor, right? The two big head honchos that were kind of guiding our hero and our villain. They never made them. Stampede is giant, so I can kind of understand, but how great would it have been if we got like a Stampede kind of playset? And Shaman, I mean, you obviously same scale. That's a no-brainer for me.
Yeah, so, I mean, had Wave 1 succeeded, at least up to Mattel's expectations, there was a Wave 2 already waiting in the wings, and we've seen some images of this. So JB, of course, was planned for Wave 2. She had a bit more of a silver costume. She had sort of this, like, hammer action by the looks of it, and also Dingo Dan in disguise. Long Arm John, and there was a really fun looking Rampage the Bull, who was essentially like this bucking bronco type robotic bull. I think there was one more vehicle, Starhawk. It could have been fun. I mean, you were really starting to see the world building out here. One
of the biggest detriments to this line is the fact that Mattel was so sure of it, they wanted to get it out for Christmas '86. The show didn't launch until '87. That's a real problem.
Ultimately, why I think Bravestarr failed was that year gap. So the toy line was released, and it was on the shelf all by itself without any media. And that's a death sentence in the 80s, unfortunately. And this was the last kick at the can for Filmation. So it really is sad, because I think there was such a future for that cartoon and for that toy line. It's just a shame.
Part of why we bought half the things we bought, or begged our parents to buy the things we bought, we were connecting with the mythology of it. Mythology came from the TV show. So unfortunately, the toy line didn't have that good of a launch because we didn't get the cartoon until much, much later.
On top of that, I mean, we were trained throughout the 70s and 80s, ever since Star Wars and Adventure Peach Bowl, that, 3 3/4 inch, pushing up to 4.5 throughout the 80s. That was the standard. That's what fit in our hands. I understand and appreciate that they had to be a little taller, pushing nearly 8 inches tall, but they had to be big enough to accommodate giant laser packs and batteries and whatnot. That made it so that the vehicles, the playsets, were likewise huge. So parents are going to see this and see the extreme price tag and say no.
Now, regardless of its successes or shortcomings, it's easy to look back at Bravestarr as a franchise with a level of fondness. As already discussed, and as nice as the toys were, the larger scale made them a little impractical for crossover play with your other toys, and while a respectable 65 episodes were aired for its first and only cartoon season with a world of unrealized potential ahead, the lack of immediately available media made it difficult for Bravestarr to gain momentum out of the gate for its 1986 toy line release. Yes, some toys in the 80s still hit blockbuster levels of success, even with launching a year ahead of an associated cartoon, but those toys quite notably at least had a comic series released in parallel with them, whether it was produced by a major publisher or packed in with the figures themselves. There was eventually a pair of comic issues released by Blackthorn Publishing, but those 2 issues came out only after the toys were released, and it was too short of a run to be thought of as anything more than miscellaneous merchandise. Some attempts have been made to bring Bravestarr into the modern toy world, be it official or otherwise, and we as fellow fans can hopefully appreciate such efforts that assist in growing Bravestarr's legacy going forward. That said, those who either lived through the era of Bravestarr's initial launch or managed to find it as a diamond in the rough, or maybe I should say a curium in the rough, can appreciate it as much as any of the major toy lines of the 1980s.
I think the legacy is a fond one.
It may have been one of the last projects by Filmation, but if you're going to go out strong.
Bravestarr to me will always be special. It will always be that toy line that my mom got me.
I just remember loving the characters. I love the character designs.
I think Bravestarr is an incredible role model.
And it's a toy line that I think a lot of people should look into. I think you'd be surprised at how cool they are.
I would recommend anybody go back and watch that.
It's done incredibly well, and in my opinion, it holds up.
And if you happen to like this video, don't go anywhere just yet. I've got some other toy history video topics that you can click on, starting with this one right over here. And when you're done with that one, head on back over here and click on this other video right over here. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time. Take care.